Good evening. This is Michael with On Point Preparedness, and I have a very exciting interview for you all today, and it is concerning the increase in earthquakes, tsunamis from earthquakes, volcanic eruptions, and sinkholes. And to talk with us about that today is John L. Casey. John, how you doing, sir?
Just fine, Michael. Good to be back with you. Thank you.
Yeah, and for those of you who have not watched my channel before, John was with us about 5 months ago to talk about the fact that we are not going into global warming. We are actually going into global cooling. And he supports this with a lot of research, and it's based on the fact that the sun, which is our biggest energy influencer, is at the bottom of a 206-year cycle, much like the Earth goes through cycles. And at the bottom of this cycle, the sun has very limited solar activity, which is in fact allowing the planet to cool. And throughout documented history, civilizations have gone through this cooling period, and it has had, in some instances, catastrophic events on the civilization. And John has written 2 books about this. It's Cold Sun and Dark Winter. We'll talk a little bit about that in the future. And then I'll also post a link in this video so you can watch that interview back 5 months ago. Just a little bit about John if you don't know who he is. He is the president of the President of Space and Science Research Corporation. He's also the founder and chairman of the International Earthquake and Volcano Prediction Center. And he's also served as the former White House Space Program advisor and consultant to NASA. And the thing that I like about John, which some of you may not know, is he does not accept any government sponsorship for his work. So he is free of the bureaucracy. So I wanted to frame this discussion a little bit. I watch the news a lot on a daily basis, just updating my website. And I am seeing a trend in all this increased geologic activity in terms of frequency and severity. Some of the biggest incidents that we've had is Nepal. That's all in the news right now, and they've had 3 major earthquakes, I think, in the last month. We've also had the Indonesian volcano that has erupted. Calbuco, Chile, has had a volcano that has erupted. We all know about some later incidents like the earthquakes in Haiti, the Japan, Fukushima tsunami, and then even a little bit further is the Indonesian tsunami. And when I look over the course of or over the span of the internet, people are coming up with a whole variety of mechanisms for why this is happening. Some say that it's man-made, and they're blaming it on fracking or geoengineering. Some are going down the route of conspiracy and saying this is the government with their HARP program. A lot of people see this as supernatural with regards to revelations in the Bible with everything else that's going on with the economy. Some say it's no increase at all, and this is just media hype. And in the age of social media, they want to get these juicy stories of catastrophe and exploit it, or something else. And that's what John is here to talk about, and actually relates to our previous interview. John, I got 2 questions to start with, and I'll let you have the floor. Is there really an increase in the frequency and severity of these geologic activities, being earthquakes, tsunamis, sinkholes, and volcanic eruptions, or is it just social media? And then what are your theories as to why this is happening, if in fact it is true events?
As to the first question, you're absolutely right. Even the U.S. government now recognizes that we've entered a new era of not only increased frequency, but increased intensity of geophysical phenomena, both volcanic and especially earthquakes. As to the second question, the mechanism is not understood. But going back to your introductory comments, whether they be biblical or conspiratorial or whatever, there is a very clear and simple answer for this new increase in earthquakes and volcanoes. If one studies cycles of the sun, the answer is very clear. Every 206 years, when the sun goes into what we call a solar hibernation phase, basically when it cuts back on the amount of energy it emits, making the Earth colder, we see our worst volcanic eruptions and our worst earthquakes. And again, this is cyclical in nature. It happens every 206 years. There are other cycles of the sun where we see 100-year volcanic and earthquake patterns, but clearly the 206-year cycle of the sun is the main driver, and right now is the one responsible for ending global warming and bringing on a new cold era.
So I know you said the mechanisms quite aren't understood, and it's a shame that global warming has really taken all the funding. There's really not a whole lot to support global cooling or the effects of it. But you have a lot of connections and ties with geologists, and is there any two top competing theories as to why, or is it just we just know this happens based on history, and it just really we're dependent on the funding to get the research to determine why? Is there any
Well,
hypotheses?
three of the concepts being explored, again without funding, so not a lot of exploration, but three of the concepts being explored include the leaky capacitor theory, which the theoretical physicist Dr. Giovanni Gregori in Italy has proposed, is based on the sun charging up the Earth's magnetic field, and then when the sun goes into hibernation, it shuts off that charging phase, and the Earth then begins to discharge like a leaking capacitor. That could be one of the drivers for the earthquake and volcanic activity. Two other theories deal with plate movements, where in the previous 200 years, as these plates, the mantle was warming up, moving faster, may have led to a final buildup phase leading to catastrophic earthquakes and volcanoes. The third component of that last, or the second component of that last theory is that it's like when the sun stops the warming and goes into cooling, it's like slamming the brakes on in your car, everyone gets thrown forward. That dynamic shift could result in earthquakes and volcanic activity and transference of energy from the Earth's outer core to the mantle and to the surface. So those are some of the three theories being looked at, but you're absolutely right. There's no funding whatsoever to study global cooling effects, only global warming, and unfortunately that also affects studies of earthquake phenomena based on global cooling.
Yeah, I think the common man, looking at the news, they not only feel it in their bones, they're seeing it. They're seeing these just major catastrophic events, and this just more or less validates, even if there isn't hard data to support it. I mean, we're living it just as others have lived through it throughout history. So I know you're an advocate about the solar cycles and how we're going into global cooling, and also how this has some collateral damage, I guess, if you want to call it that, in terms of the geologic component. And you're out there. You're talking to lots of local news stations. I just heard you on a Cincinnati radio station, 55 KRC, this week. But you've also contacted the White House. I mean, you were a former space advisor to the Bush administration. So what's the extent of you notifying the government about all these incidents and them having the necessity to prepare for the American citizen?
Well, the U.S. government has, since I began this in 2007, been constantly updated and made aware of any research findings, conclusions, and predictions, both for climate change and especially earthquake and volcanic threats. So there's really no question that the U.S. government and many state governments as well are well aware of our research. Fortunately, as you mentioned, we're getting a lot of attention now through radio and other venues. For example, the Newsmax Media organization has begun a nationwide promotion of my book, Dark Winter, that not only explains the climate change we're going through and its ill effects, but also talks about the earthquake and volcano connection. So I'm very pleased to have Newsmax supporting my efforts. They have recently, by the way, begun to air a 1 hour documentary on my book, Dark Winter. If anyone wants to see that documentary, all they have to go to online is newsmaxtv.com and check the daily and weekend schedule. Usually it's shown a couple times each week, and that documentary summarizes what's in the book Dark Winter, talking about the next cold era and these new record earthquakes and volcanoes we're going to see.
And unfortunately, we're just skimming the surface in this interview. I will post links to both of John's books in the YouTube description, as well as the documentary that John talked about, as well as the websites that he runs as well, because he has, quarterly reports on the solar cycles as well as geologic activity. Is that correct?
Glad you mentioned that. In fact, June 10, in about 2 weeks, we will issue our next semi-annual global climate status report. And coincidentally to your interview here, this particular report focuses almost exclusively on the threat of earthquakes and volcanic activity, mostly earthquakes, because they produce the most casualties. And I'll announce with you for the first time on the web that we have done a paper, very detailed research going into the New Madrid seismic zone, which is between St. Louis and Memphis, Tennessee. And we have elevated the threat level significantly for that area. We now believe that the next solar hibernation, which has already begun, is producing the greatest threat in over 200 years for a catastrophic earthquake in the New Madrid seismic zone. So we're urging our government and the governors and all institutions in that area to immediately start preparing for this new higher threat period that we've just begun to enter.
That is an excellent segue, because I want to talk about our government. I think it's good to have a healthy distrust of your government. And as many people know, during the Bush and Obama administrations, there's not a whole lot of transparency. And not only is there lack of transparency, but people are feeling threatened by their own government. When you start looking at all these components, like how the Federal Reserve is in our debt system, how there's an increasing police state, Patriot Act and National Defense Authorization Act, all these things that sort of erode away our civil liberties. And so people don't trust them quite much. And one of the things that's interesting is, you have notified the government. I'm sure that there's people in high positions that are aware that this is real, that we are at the bottom of this solar cycle. There will be cold temperatures which affect crops and food supply. There may be big incidents like the New Madrid fault or even Yellowstone. And curiously, in October 2014, the United States sponsored an event called the Great Shakeout. It was touted as the largest earthquake preparedness drill in history, I believe. I'll have to post a link for people to view that. But is the government being sort of passive aggressive here? Or are they just trying to protect themselves to where they're not coming out? They're still saying global warming and climate change. They're really not saying that global cooling is here yet. They are funding these big, massive earthquake drills and things like that nature with this great shakeout. I mean, were you aware of this drill and how it relates to your research?
Absolutely. The Great Shakeout began, as you correctly said, last year, but this year it's on October the 15th, and it is to cover as many states as possible, including some of the islands in the Pacific that we provide management and funding for. We expect in the New Madrid fault area over 500,000 to participate, and nationwide well over 1.5 million that are already signed up that will be participating in this. The basic scenario is to prepare for massive earthquakes primarily. And of course the concern has always been Southern California or the San Andreas Fault area. But only recently have we seen serious consideration for the other very active fault zones, the New Madrid Fault and the one in South Carolina, which we hear almost nothing about, and yet they had a major quake there in 1817. They are now due for another one. But clearly, our recent warning is for the New Madrid Fault. We had already alerted the state of California and the U.S. government that we saw the southern portion of California entering a new high risk period coming up, also because of the solar hibernation. But the New Madrid warning is new for us, yet the paper that we published in the Global Climate Report that's coming out in June is very thorough and very convincing. It shows that the last 4 times we've had a solar hibernation or major solar minimum, we've had our worst earthquakes hit the New Madrid Fault. And now that we've entered a new solar hibernation, it's incumbent on the average person, much less the U.S. government, to get very serious on preparation. The October 15 shakeout is well timed, but of course, the U.S. government doesn't really disclose why they're doing these things. I hope it's because of work that we have done and recommendations we've made. But right now, our group, both the Earthquake Prediction Group and the Climate Group, are somewhat persona non grata in the White House. I used to go there often, but certainly not with this administration.
Right. And you know, when I subscribe to a lot of folks, you know, that are into preparedness or they're into sort of the alternative media news, trying to supplement, I guess if that's a nice way of saying it, what mainstream does not cover. You know, it's all about the economy. People are saying that this whole police state and surveillance and everything is all because you know, the bubble's gonna pop. I mean, it's a mathematical probability. But I mean, what you're saying is, you know, this solar cycle might actually be the reason, or it's going to be part of the reason, because you know, whether you have these massive earthquakes that occur in the states, or you know, as we discussed in our previous video during the last solar hibernation, what was it, the Dalton minimum? You know, food was scarce, and there were food riots, and perhaps that's what the increase in military police is. Do you have any thoughts on that?
Well, again, this gets into conspiratorial work. If in fact the reports of the U.S. government buying large numbers of packaged foods for long shelf life foods, or buying large numbers of ammunition, or developing FEMA camps, as they're called, then one has to be very concerned. I think what's driving all the conspiracy theories, unfortunately, is the record distrust Americans have for their own government. Clearly, we've been manipulated, we've been deceived on many fronts. Economically, we're facing some real difficult times in the future. I heard an interview with the president of the Dallas Federal Reserve Office, and it was pretty dire what he was talking about. And these are people who are not noted for extremism in any fashion, usually just the opposite. And I think anyone who reads about the piling debt that we're facing, especially because of the Obama administration giving away trillions of dollars in essence, not only here but abroad, we have to be very concerned. Roughly 40% of every dollar that the U.S. government spends is borrowed money from other governments, notably China and Japan. This is a very sad state we're in economically. And when you combine that with the new cold era that's coming, which is now confirmed, if you combine that with the now confirmed rapid increase in earthquakes and volcanic activity, we have a confluence of major bad trends, if you will, that are going to unfold here in the next 10 to 20 years.
Yeah.
It's not a good picture.
Right. Yeah, and you can see why a lot of people are looking at Revelations and the biblical aspect of it, just because these things are unprecedented, whether you talk about the economy and then these cosmic and geologic events, morality of people. But I don't want to digress too much.
People are looking,
Focusing. Oh, sorry.
yes, I'm sorry to interrupt.
Oh,
People are looking for answers, and they can't go to the media because the media is widely deceptive and widely biased in its reporting. They can't go to the U.S. government because no one trusts the government. So the people are looking for answers from wherever they can find it.
Mm-hmm.
If it's the Bible, fine. If it's independent research companies doing honest and reliable science, like our two groups, the Earthquake and the Climate Group, more power to them. But I recommend everyone become as informed as possible on these various theories, both the economic theories, the earthquake and volcano, and the climate theories. With regard to HARP and geoengineering and Planet X, really far out theories, I think we have to be very skeptical.
Right.
But when it comes to hard science, there's some pretty good science to rely on. And if you look to the Space and Science Research Corporation, we have been independently evaluated, for example, and told we have the best climate prediction record of any climate research company in the United States. So there's at least one source people can go to. But now the U.S. government, vis-a-vis the U.S. Geological Service, has now come out and agreed, yes, we are looking at new increased rates and intensities of earthquakes and volcanic eruptions. And they have also issued a warning now, similar to the one that we did for Southern California. So finally, we're seeing a break in the barriers of information and communication out of our government. Some of this could be driven by people who are below the administrator and below the cabinet level and not political appointees who really do know what's going on and are concerned and are doing what they can to get us prepared for some of these impending disasters that science certainly says are coming.
Yeah, and just to follow the advice from folks like Greg Hunter or Gerald Salante, who are out there, trying to provide alternative news. It is, prepare yourself mentally, physically, and spiritually. And I know you're busy. I don't want to take up too much of your time, so I do want to end on one note. And people are always very interested in timing. And I know you have some predictions on when the very bottom of this cycle is and when we may see the worst of it. If you could speak a little bit on that, and then we'll wrap things up.
In November of last year, we had so many requests that we finally issued a detailed, specific schedule for the next 15 years. And let me caveat that somewhat by saying that the sun has just sent us all a very powerful, important signal by creating a warm temperature spike from 2013 to 2015. This was fully predictable by a study of solar activity and sunspot cycles going back 400 years or more. We now know that every time we get a spike of warm temperature in the second peak, there's always two peaks in an 11-year solar cycle, but we had a secondary intensive peak with a warm temperature spike. This only happens when the sun is about to go into deep cold phase. And based on that and previous research, we issued a press release. You can download it from our website at spaceandscience.net. It tells you exactly when and how cold it will be for the next 15 years.
Well, John, like I said, the previous video had almost 400,000 views between the multiple different sources. People are very interested in what you have to say. I'm sure this message will be just as popular. Do heed John's word. Do prepare. Do educate yourself on what's currently happening as well as history. And John, it's been a real pleasure. I really enjoyed the last time we talked as well as this time.
Well, one final comment, if I can.
Oh, absolutely.
I'm doing this not to scare people, but to get people prepared, get them informed. And when people are informed, they don't panic. They don't go into chaos. They really are ready for what's coming. And I don't want people to just survive. I want them to thrive during this new cold era.
Yep. And when you read John's work, whether it's his books or the quarterly reports or the information on his website, the one thing I really like is you're very balanced. Definitely not fear mongering. And so you can see this is very science driven. So we very much appreciate that.
Thank you, Michael.
All right.
Good to be with you again.
Thank you very much.